My name is Nathaniel Brooks, and what I'm about to share with you is something that changed my life forever. This happened on March 14th, 2017, a day that started like any other but ended with me discovering something I never thought possible. Looking back, my life had been filled with more pain than I thought I could endure. My mother left me when I was just a baby, and if it hadn't been for a neighbor who found me crying alone in a house, I might not have survived. After that, my grandmother, Evelyn, took me in. She did her best to raise me, but the weight of it all eventually broke her. I was still young when she had a nervous breakdown, and once again, I was left to face the world alone. I was sent to live with some distant relatives, people I barely knew, and it didn't take long for me to realize this wasn't going to be a safe or loving home. They claimed to be deeply religious, but their version of faith felt cold and cruel. My uncle, Robert, was the worst. He twisted scripture to justify his anger, often using his beliefs as a weapon to control and punish me. No matter how hard I tried to do the right thing, I always felt like a failure in his eyes. Over time, I started to believe it too, that I was broken, unworthy, and destined to be a disappointment. As I got older, those feelings never left me. By the time I was a teenager, I had grown used to feeling like I didn't belong, like I was just drifting through life with no real purpose. While my classmates were planning their futures, I could barely find the energy to get out of bed most mornings. Depression consumed me, making every day feel heavier than the last. I started drinking to quiet the thoughts in my head, and when that wasn't enough, I turned to medication. At first, I told myself I was just trying to take the edge off, but before long, it became something I relied on just to make it through the day. The more I numbed myself, the more I felt like I was slipping away, like I was becoming a shadow of who I once was. Eventually, I convinced myself that the world would be better off without me. I started planning how I'd end it all, and one idea kept coming back to me, stepping in front of a train. It felt quick, final, and most importantly, it seemed like something that wouldn't leave too much of a mess for anyone to deal with. One person refused to give up on me, my friend, Eric. He knew I wasn't okay, even when I tried to hide it. He started showing up more often, asking questions I didn't want to answer. I could see the worry in his eyes, but I didn't believe he could really understand what I was going through. One night, after he confronted me yet again, I snapped. We got into a huge argument. I said things I shouldn't have, and when he wouldn't stop pushing, I stormed out of the car. I don't know what came over me, but I opened the door while the car was still moving and jumped. I remember the harsh slam of the pavement, the way my head hit the ground, but the pain was brief. Almost immediately, everything started to change. I felt light, almost like I was floating, and when I looked down, I saw my own body lying in the street. Eric was screaming, cars were skidding to a stop, but none of it felt real. I wasn't scared. I wasn't hurting. I felt calm. In that strange, weightless state, I felt myself being pulled away from everything I had ever known. The sounds of the street faded, and all I could see was a brilliant golden light. It wasn't just something I could see, I could feel it washing over me, filling me with a peace that was impossible to describe. Every ounce of pain, fear, and regret I had ever carried seemed to dissolve in that moment. I didn't feel like I was floating anymore, it was more like I had become part of the light itself, like I had finally let go of everything that had weighed me down for so long. Time didn't seem to matter anymore. I couldn't tell if this experience lasted a second or a lifetime, all I knew was that I never wanted to leave. As I drifted deeper into that golden light, I felt an overwhelming sense of warmth, like I was being wrapped in something pure and comforting. There was no fear, no sadness, just a powerful feeling that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I felt lighter than I ever had before, as if all the pain, guilt, and anxiety I'd carried my entire life had simply vanished. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt whole, like I wasn't broken after all. But then something else happened. I started to notice shapes forming within the light, not clear figures, but distinct enough that I knew I wasn't alone. These beings felt familiar, almost like I had known them my entire life, yet I couldn't place their faces. They radiated warmth and kindness, and though they didn't speak, I could somehow feel their thoughts. It was as if they were sharing emotions with me directly, feelings of love, acceptance, and understanding. In that moment, I realized that every mistake I had made, every regret I had carried, none of it defined me in their eyes. They didn't see me as a failure or a burden. They saw me as someone who had been hurting, someone who was worthy of love despite everything. As I stood there surrounded by these gentle souls, I felt myself being pulled towards something even greater, a presence unlike anything I had ever encountered. The light intensified, growing brighter and stronger until it seemed to fill every part of me. I couldn't see what was at the center of it, but I knew without a doubt that this was something divine, something far beyond human understanding. It wasn't a figure or a face, it was a presence, powerful yet peaceful, overwhelming yet inviting. The moment I felt it, I was hit with a wave of love so powerful that it seemed to consume me. It wasn't just love, it was perfect, unconditional acceptance, like every wound I'd ever carried was being healed at once. I don't know how to explain it, but in that presence, I felt like I was seeing myself for the first time, not as the broken, miserable person I had believed myself to be, but as someone valuable, someone who mattered. It felt like this presence knew every dark corner of my past, the things I regretted, the mistakes I had made, the hurt I had caused, and still, none of it changed how deeply I was loved. I realized in that moment that this love had been with me my entire life, even in the moments I thought I was completely alone. As I stood there, overwhelmed by this love, I began to see my life unfold before me like scenes from a movie. Every moment, the good, the bad, and the painful, played out in front of me with perfect clarity. I saw myself as a child, crying in the dark after my mother left. I saw the nights I spent alone, wondering why no one seemed to care. I watched the moments I had lashed out in anger, the times I had hurt people who were only trying to help me. But instead of feeling judged or condemned, I felt something entirely different, compassion. It was as if this presence was showing me my life not to punish me, but to help me understand. I realized that even in my darkest moments, I had never truly been alone. Every time I had felt abandoned, this presence had been there, quietly watching, waiting for me to reach out. I remembered nights when I had sat alone in my room, feeling like no one in the world cared whether I lived or died. In those moments, I had believed there was nothing but emptiness surrounding me, but now I could see that I had been wrong. That presence, that endless, loving force, had been with me the whole time. Then something else began to unfold before me, something that shook me to my core. I was shown what would have happened if I had succeeded in taking my own life. I saw the pain it would have caused, not just for my friend Eric, but for so many others. I watched my grandmother sobbing, blaming herself for what had happened. I saw Eric struggling with guilt, wondering if there was more he could have done. I even saw strangers, people I had barely known, who would have been impacted by my death in ways I never imagined. But what haunted me most was what I saw next. I was shown the fate of souls who had ended their own lives, people who, like me, had believed that death was their only escape from pain. These souls weren't in a place of fire and torment, but they were trapped, stuck in a state of isolation and regret. It was as if they were frozen in the emotions that had driven them to that point: fear, sadness, hopelessness, unable to break free. There was no sense of punishment, but rather a deep, aching emptiness, a void where they couldn't fully connect with the love that surrounded them. I realized that these souls weren't forgotten or unloved, that same divine presence still reached out to them, but they couldn't feel it. They were so consumed by their pain that they had shut themselves off from the very thing that could heal them. Seeing this broke my heart because I knew that had things gone differently, I could have ended up there too. As I watched those lost souls, I felt an overwhelming sadness, not just for them, but for myself. I knew that if I had succeeded in ending my life, I would have been one of them, trapped in that same emptiness, unable to feel the love that had been with me all along. The thought terrified me, but more than that, it filled me with regret. I had spent so much of my life believing I was unloved, when in reality, that love had been reaching out to me the entire time. In that moment, I felt the presence, that divine, powerful presence, speaking to me, not with words, but directly into my heart. It wasn't angry or disappointed, instead, it was gentle, almost pleading. It showed me that my life still had purpose, that I was meant to keep going, even if I couldn't see the reason yet. Every struggle I had faced, every moment of pain, had not been meaningless. There were people I was meant to help, people whose lives would be changed because of what I had endured. I was shown glimpses of those moments, times in the future where I would be able to comfort someone who felt like giving up, simply because I had once been in their shoes. I saw myself sitting with a young man who was on the brink of ending his own life, sharing my story and helping him find hope again. I saw a conversation with a friend where just a few simple words from me would stop them from making the same mistake I had almost made. And in that moment, I realized that surviving wasn't just about saving myself, it was about being there for others who were still hurting. I wanted to stay in that place, wrapped in that perfect peace, but deep down, I knew I couldn't. The presence that had embraced me was guiding me back, letting me know that my time wasn't finished yet. I had been given a second chance, and as much as part of me didn't want to leave, I knew I had to take it. Before I returned, I felt one final wave of that incredible love, stronger than anything I had felt before. It was as if God Himself was telling me, "You are loved. You are enough. You are never alone." The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air, my chest burning as I blinked up at the blurry faces surrounding me. I was back in my body, lying on the cold pavement with Eric hovering over me, his face pale and streaked with tears. You're okay," he kept repeating, his voice shaky. I could hear sirens in the distance, but none of it seemed to matter. All I could think about was what I had just experienced, that love, that peace, and the overwhelming realization that my life still had meaning. Recovery wasn't easy. Physically, I had to heal from the injuries I suffered that night, but the harder part was learning how to face the thoughts that had pushed me to the edge. For so long, I had believed that I was worthless, that my pain served no purpose. But after what I had seen, I knew that wasn't true. Every moment of suffering had been preparing me to help others, to remind people that no matter how broken they feel, their story isn't over yet. Eric stood by me through it all. I finally opened up to him about everything, the pain I had buried for so long, the thoughts I had kept hidden, and the incredible experience I had that night. I told him about the souls I had seen, those who had taken their own lives and were trapped in a state of regret and emptiness. I explained that they weren't being punished, but they couldn't move forward because they had lost all hope. Eric just listened, tears in his eyes, and when I finished, he said something I'll never forget, "You're still here for a reason." And he was right. I know now that my life wasn't spared by accident. That night, I was given a second chance, a chance to tell others that there is always hope, even when you can't see it. If you're struggling right now, if you feel like there's no way out, please know this, you are loved more deeply than you can imagine. Your life has meaning, and no matter how heavy things feel right now, this pain will not last forever. If you or someone you know is feeling lost, please don't face it alone. Reach out to someone, a friend, a family member, anyone who can walk alongside you. There is hope, and there is a reason you're still here. I'm living proof that even in your darkest moments, there's still a light waiting to guide you home. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found any part of this helpful, please consider sharing this video. You never know who might need to hear these words today. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel for more stories of hope and faith. You are loved, never forget that.